Hello, everyone. I hope that you are doing well. Hopefully, you guys are all healthy. I have a lot of students who are out with the flu, some other things, which is actually one of the reasons why I'm a little late in posting this. I had a friend admitted to the hospital, so a little bit of a soapbox. Just if you're not feeling good, make sure that you're being careful, especially if you are working with the little children, as many of you guys are. So I hope that you are having a good weekend. And as we look into our next week, I wanted to catch up and mention a couple of things. First, just a couple of logistics. I've had some emails asking about due dates. So things are always due Sunday night, unless it is one of our discussion board posts. So initial posts are always due on Friday. And then that will give you time to post your two reactions to your classmates' discussion posts by Sunday night. So again, any assignment is due Sunday night with the caveat of Friday night for initial discussion board posts. I also wanted to remind you for the discussion post, make sure you're looking at the rubric. You guys did a really excellent job. I took some time grading those and giving you some feedback. So if you have any questions about that, please let me know. If you have any arguments against it, again, just let me know. I'd love to hear it and love to talk to you about that. This next week, I'll be a little bit more present in the discussion posts. Usually the first week, I like to kind of sit back and hear your thoughts. And as the semester progresses, I'll be talking more. But really, I'm interested in your perspective, and I don't want to just be inserting myself. So do make sure that you take the time to look at my feedback and some of those probing questions that I propose to you along with those comments. So moving on to the discussion post, I wanted to point out a couple of things, have notes down here because a lot of you had some really good quotes. Unfortunately, this discussion post is totally normal. There are a lot of schools, particularly in higher grades like the high school, where gifted education is not a thing and we are not fully supporting those students. It's particularly a problem when we have students that are high in transition. So if you think about like military children, they are getting one type of service in one environment and then they're moving and getting a very different type of service. And this problem is really rooted in not having a clear definition of the gifted. So a lot of times we spend all of this time trying to define the gifted, but we have this huge encompassing definition, but we're not matching the services to our definition. So just an example here. I worked on a grant. I think I've mentioned this already. We were working with military schools and they wanted us to include kind of like a creativity facet of their definition of gifted, which if you know anything about me, I totally agreed. However, we started to talk to them and they did not have any designated personnel for their gifted education courses. So they didn't have the capability to actually serve individuals who were, quote, creatively gifted, which I quote that because there's some argument in that. So basically what they were saying is let's have this really big encompassing definition and we'll identify these gifted kids, but then we won't appropriately serve them. So it would be the equivalent of saying, wow, you have really impressive reading scores, you deserve to be in gifted education, and then that child gets into gifted ed and they're doing like math acceleration. So it's a mismatch. When we talk about it, it seems so obvious, but it's a very common problem in gifted ed, that mismatch between identification and services. It wasn't really explicitly discussed in this past discussion post, but I wanted to bring that up and have us keep that in mind. A couple of things that I wanted to point out from some of our posts from our classmates here. A lot of you guys referenced the Marlin report and really honed in on that beyond normal services, which was an excellent connection between your reading and this case study here. So, for example, I wanted to point out Morgan wrote that giftedness can grow with the child. So she did a good job pointing out the importance of the environment. So when we think about giftedness, if any of you guys are familiar with Dweck's work with fixed and growth mindset, Same thing. So giftedness isn't this, quote, stagnant thing. We really have to develop it. So we have to give the students the correct environment so that they can develop their creative potential, their gifted potential. So I thought that was a really good point, and definitely pretty powerful argument of why the high school needed gifted education. A couple of other things. Rebecca really quoted the importance of we have to require beyond normal services, emphasizing that word require. So we are doing the students a disservice if we're just saying you're doing well enough in classes. A couple of other things. I liked Andy's comment that if, hey, these students are acing the standardized test, clearly we need to be challenging them a little bit more. Again, Angel pointed back to providing the appropriate environment and discussing Renzulli's three-ring definition of gifted ed and talking about how we can't have an intersection between that above average ability and that correct task motivation unless we are also providing the correct environment. I did want to talk a little bit about this issue with testing. So standardized tests are unfortunately how we often, quote, find the gifted. When we get to our module on the invisible gifted, we'll talk about some of the underlying issues with that. And I'm sure that many of you trained much more experience than I have, most likely. Educators know the danger of using just one single test score to make any kind of decision, let alone a huge decision of gifted education services. So the use of cutoff scores is fairly common, but hopefully you understand that it's not necessarily the best practice. So what is the difference between 95th percentile, you're gifted, 94th percentile, sorry, it's not there. So we'll talk about different ways of identifying students. One of those ways is highly related to our next module, which is characteristics of gifted students. So as you go into the next module, which I'll talk about in a moment, the case study, I do want you to be thinking about how those characteristics would manifest in the classroom. A couple of other things to mention on the standardized test. So when we say that they're in the 95th percentile, that means they are scoring the same or better than 95% of all of the ninth graders. So it's no surprise that they're at the 95th percentile because these are your, quote, gifted students. So we really need to make sure we look at the norm groups when we interpret any type of standardized test. And this is a common issue with gifted education, is that really bright children often cannot demonstrate their full potential on standardized tests. So we call this the ceiling effect, right? So they have reached the peak, can't even see that, we've reached the peak of how high the test can measure, okay? So think of it like I want to see how high you can jump, but I put you in a room that has a 7-foot ceiling, right? So you could potentially jump 8-9 feet. You could be, Michael Jordan jumping super high. But if I put you in a 7-foot room, the highest you can jump is 7 feet high. It's the same thing with our tests. So the students are just maxing out. That doesn't mean they're all the same. It means they're maxing out. So that points to yet another very specific need of these students. When we give them standardized tests, they get very often uniform results, and that doesn't tell them anything. It doesn't mean they're the same in every single context. It just means that they've maxed out on the test. So something else for you to be thinking about, not only should we be careful with making one decision from one test score, but also you really want to think of, number one, who is this standardized test normed against? Is it representative? And number two, is there some sort of ceiling effect going on before we make any intense decisions off of that? So those are a lot of thoughts that I had from your initial discussion posts. Again, you guys did a really good job. I see you quoting your readings. Make sure that you are APA style citing them, so a last name and the author. And I want to see a lot of quotes, okay, so more than two. That's what the rubric is calling for. So I really want to see you translating all of this library of material and really applying it and using it. So moving on to this coming week, we are starting characteristics of gifted students. I think it's one of the most impactful modules, mainly because we all have our own stereotype of what a gifted student looks like. And I want you to be thinking of that because it's going to make a difference. So how would you see the gifted student? And as you start going through this library of materials, really start asking yourself, would I want this gifted child in my classroom, right? So we think of like a highly curious child is probably gifted, but they're probably really annoying because they're asking you questions after questions and they're not letting you get all of your work done. So our case this week is around a child who is most likely quite gifted, but is causing a little bit of problem in the classroom because he is taking a long time to complete his work. So I want you to start the week off, read the case study first, and start asking yourself, what are some common characteristics that we're seeing in this child that could potentially show us that he is gifted? And then progress to looking through your library. I would encourage you, I realize it's a lot of material. There are multiple representations of material. If you've heard of universal design, that's done on purpose. So make sure that if you feel that you would learn the most out of the videos, do those first, and then treat your readings more as follow-up, where you do need to read everything, but just keep in mind that sometimes things overlap, and that is done on purpose. So this is our first module where it will be just 2 weeks, so all the modules will be like this from now on. So don't wait until Thursday to start doing your readings. I would definitely jump on that and get started. And I look forward to reading your discussion posts about the case of the turkey. Intriguing title. And I will be a little bit more interactive this week in terms of the discussion posts. Again, I would love to meet all of you guys. Thanks for those who have come and talked to me in my office. And if you'd like to schedule a conference call, anything like that, I am 100% here and eager and ready to work with you. So I hope that you have a wonderful week, and I will definitely be keeping in touch. Thanks.